I had put everything into that business. 3 years of savings, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of hope I had left after leaving my stable job to chase something bigger. When it collapsed, it didn't happen quietly. Suppliers pulled out, debts piled up faster than I could manage, and within weeks, the company I had built from nothing folded completely. I came home that night feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me, carrying a weight I didn't know how to explain. I needed comfort, understanding, maybe even silence. Instead, I walked into a dinner party I had completely forgotten was happening. Rachel had invited her closest friends over, the same group who always made subtle comments about my risky decision to leave a secure career. When I mentioned, quietly, that the business had failed, the table fell silent for a moment, until Rachel laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward one, but a genuine, amused laugh that echoed across the dining room. "I told him this would happen," she said to her friends, shaking her head as if my failure were simply confirmation of something she'd predicted for months. Their laughter joined hers, and I sat there, humiliated in my own home. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. The shock of losing everything I'd worked for was already suffocating, and hearing my wife mock it in front of an audience made the pain sharper, more personal, impossible to ignore. Later, after everyone left, she brushed past me in the kitchen and said, almost casually, "Maybe now you'll actually listen to practical advice instead of chasing fantasies." The words landed harder than the business failure itself. That night, I packed a small bag, told her I needed space, and left without explaining where I was going or when I'd return. I stayed with my brother for the first few weeks, sleeping on his couch, piecing together what remained of my finances and my pride. Rachel called occasionally, more out of curiosity than concern, asking when I planned on getting serious about life again. I stopped answering eventually, not out of anger, but because something inside me had shifted permanently that dinner night. I realized I didn't just lose a business. I lost the comfort of believing my wife would stand beside me during hard times instead of using them as material for laughter among her friends. Over the following year, I threw myself into rebuilding, not recklessly this time, but methodically. I took a consulting job to stabilize finances while quietly studying everything that had gone wrong with my failed venture. Cash flow mistakes, poor timing, decisions made from desperation rather than strategy. I didn't tell Rachel much about my progress. Our conversations became distant, transactional, mostly about logistics rather than emotion. She assumed I was simply working a regular job now, settling into the practical life she had always pushed me toward. She had no idea I was preparing to try again, smarter and far more determined. 18 months later, with a small team and careful planning, I launched a new company. Leaner, sharper, built on lessons paid for through painful failure. It grew slowly at first, then rapidly, as the product found real demand in a market I understood far better this time. I kept it quiet, avoiding family gatherings, distancing myself from people who had once laughed at my ambition. Rachel and I were technically still married, living separate emotional lives under one roof, our relationship reduced to shared bills and empty pleasantries neither of us bothered fixing anymore. By the 3rd year, the company had grown enough that industry publications started reaching out for interviews, curious about the founder who had quietly built something significant without any public fanfare. I agreed to one feature, mostly for credibility, never expecting it to spread as widely as it did within our social circle. Rachel found out not from me, but from a friend who forwarded her the article with a message reading, "Isn't this your husband?" I imagine the shock she felt seeing my name attached to numbers far larger than anything she'd expected from the man she once mocked. She called me that night, her voice unusually careful, congratulating me while fishing for details about the company's success. I answered politely but briefly, offering nothing beyond what the article already covered. The dinner party laughter echoed clearly in my memory as she spoke, and I found myself strangely calm, no longer needing her approval or acknowledgement to feel validated. Success hadn't been about proving her wrong, it had simply been about proving to myself that failure wasn't the end of my story, no matter how loudly someone else had celebrated it. A month later, at her family's anniversary dinner, she introduced me differently to relatives who hadn't seen the article. "This is my husband, the entrepreneur," she said, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed, almost performative, completely different from the dismissive laughter I remembered from years earlier. Her friends complimented the business, asked eager questions, suddenly fascinated by decisions they'd once mocked as reckless fantasy. I answered politely, watching the same people who had laughed now nodding with admiration, and I understood clearly how quickly narratives shift once success becomes undeniable and impossible to ridicule anymore. But something had already broken between Rachel and me that couldn't be repaired by newfound admiration. Respect earned through success felt hollow when it hadn't existed during failure, when I needed it most. I realized her support had always been conditional, tied tightly to outcomes rather than effort, loyalty, or love. That realization, more than the business itself, became the true turning point of my life. I filed for divorce quietly, without drama, without needing public vindication. I simply walked away from a marriage that had only valued me once I stopped needing to be valued. Today, my company continues growing steadily, built on lessons learned through humiliation rather than comfort. I've remarried since then, to someone who supported me through smaller struggles long before any success arrived, someone who never once needed headlines to believe in what I was building. Looking back at that painful dinner years ago, I no longer feel anger toward Rachel's laughter. I feel gratitude, strangely enough, because it pushed me toward becoming someone capable of walking away from conditional love entirely. Sometimes the people who laugh loudest at your failure end up witnessing, quietly, exactly how far you rise without them.